Journey to the Center of the Earth by Jules Verne. Chapter 9. The Central Sea. When I regained consciousness, I found myself lying on some thick sleeping rugs. I groaned and opened my eyes to find my uncle gazing at me with tears in his eyes. "He lives! He lives!" cried my uncle. "Yes, my good uncle," I whispered. At that point, Hans joined us. "Good day," he said. "Where are we, uncle?" I asked. "What day is this? What happened?" "It is 11 o'clock at night on Sunday. August 9th. My uncle answered. "Your head is bandaged and you need to sleep. I will tell you everything tomorrow." As my eyes closed, I realized that my dangerous adventure in the interior of the earth in total darkness had lasted 4 days. When I awoke the next day, looked around me. The cave floor was a soft, silvery sand, and the ceiling was adorned with magnificent stalactites, glittering with all colors of the rainbow. There was no torch lit in the cave. Light seemed to be coming from somewhere. I imagine I could hear the sighing of wind and breaking of waves on a beach. Of course, that was all impossible, for we were 100 miles below the surface of the sea. Was I dreaming, or had some great crack in the earth brought the wind and sea to me? Or had my uncle given up his expedition and carried me back to the surface? I was puzzling over these questions when my uncle joined me. "Good morning, Harry," he said. "You're looking better. Hans has treated your wounds with his own special ointment. They are healing marvelously. Now, would you like to eat?" For the first time in days, I was hungry. As I ate, my uncle explained that my fall had brought me almost to a vertical tunnel, along with a rock slide right to his arms. "It was indeed a miracle that you were alive," he said. "We must never separate again." I looked at my uncle in astonishment. The journey, then, was not over. But we had returned to the surface? I asked. "Certainly not," he replied. "That I must be mad, for I see daylight and hear the wind and waves." My uncle smiled. "You see and hear correctly," he said, "but I cannot explain. You must go see for yourself." "Let us go," I cried, eager to satisfy my curiosity. "Just a moment. Do you feel well enough? After all, the wind is quite rough, and you must be strong for your sea voyage." "My sea voyage?" "You will see, but you must be ready to go on board by tomorrow. It may be a long trip." "And go aboard what and how?" My curiosity had to be satisfied, so I rushed from the cave. At first I could not see anything because my eyes were not accustomed to the light, and was forced to close them. When I reopened them, I was stupefied at the scene. The sea!" I cried. "Yes," said my uncle, "the Central Sea, as I have named it." It was quite true. The sea spread before me as far as my eyes could see. Its shore was made up of soft, golden sand, sprinkled with shells. Waves broke on the shore with a murmur only found in underground places. From the back of the beach, huge rocky cliffs rose higher than my eyes could see. Above my head, gases formed thick clouds, partially concealing the granite roof that I knew miles above my head. Yet between these clouds, an unusually beautiful ray of light, not like the sun, for it gave new heat. We were in some gigantic cavern, more wonderful than any I have ever read about. It left me speechless. My uncle and I strolled along the beach, breathing in salt air after 47 days of dark tunnel. Beautiful waters leaped down the rocky cliffs and disappeared into the sea. We had gone about 500 yards. We had turned a sharp bend and found us almost to a huge forest. The trees, almost shaped like umbrellas, stood tall and motionless despite the strong breeze. I could identify most of the 2,000 known trees in the world, but I'd never seen anything quite like these before. When we went towards the forest. When at last we reached it, I found that it's not forest of trees, but forest of giant mushrooms. The white mushrooms stood nearly 40 feet high, with tops spreading 40 feet across. We walked on and found new wonders with every step. Ferns as big as pine trees, giant grass, and trees as tall as 100 feet in height. "Astonishing! Magnificent!" cried my uncle. "These specimens, which are only small plants in our garden today, were all mighty trees when the world began. If this is true about plant life, what would it also be true about animal life?" I asked, looking around anxiously. "Yes, my boy. Just look at the bones of a head, and some gigantic as a trunk of trees." I stooped down eagerly and examined the lower jawbone of a mastodon and the molars of a dinothermium. "You are right," I cried. "These mighty animals once lived and died on these shores of this underground sea. Is it possible? Oh my God! These are one of the huge monsters that must be hidden in one of these mighty rocks this very moment. I looked around, but nothing alive appeared on these deserted shores. Even though I had saw many exciting things, I was tired from my recent ordeal and found it necessary to rest, especially if we were going on a sea voyage. So we returned to the cave. The next morning awoke completely refreshed. I took a bath in the water of the sea, had breakfast, and then again walked along the shore with my uncle. "Where are we in relation to the surface?" I asked him. "We are over 1,000 miles from Sniffles and 110 miles under the surface," he said. "Then that would put us, let's see, somewhere below the Scottish Highlands," I answered. "You were quite right," he asked laughingly. "Are you now planning to return to the surface?" I asked. "Go back?" he cried, "before we finish our journey? But we had reached the great sea. I judged it to only be 150 miles across. And how are we going to cross it? Swim?" "You shall see," he said. And I did, thanks to Hans' hard work, a raft 10 feet long and 5 feet wide. It was made of fossil wood and from the pines and firs that Hans had found tied together with our sturdy climbing ropes. And the mast stood upright, and hanging from it was a small sail made from one of our sheets. The six At 6 o'clock on the morning of the 13th of August, we loaded our supplies on the raft and pushed it into the sea. Hans had fashioned a rudder, and he guided us with great ease, as the wind was strong and we made good time in the first hours afloat. We passed the gigantic clumps of seaweed 3 to 4,000 feet long. They looked like snakes stretching beyond the horizon. After a few hours, Hans took a hook with a little piece of meat and dropped it into the underground sea. Were there fish in these waters? I waited a long time, then suddenly Hans pulled up his lines, and on the hook was a fish, resembling a lake sturgeon. But of course the family had been extinct for ages, a blind fish that absolutely had no eyes. In this way, we got much needed food for our future travels. The second day at sea, we found the wind steady and the raft moving as quickly as before. We were becoming bored with the trip and impatient to find each other's the other end of this vast sea. My uncle was scanning the horizon with his telescope, muttering angrily to himself. "What's wrong, uncle?" I said. "I thought the sea was only 150 miles across, but we've already traveled 3 times that distance. We are not nearing any land. I'm beginning to wonder if Saxusinum found the sea and crossed it. Wonder if we're still on the right path to the center of the earth." We sailed on like that for 2 days more. Only excitement came when we were trying to find the depths of the sea. Hans tied a crowbar to a rope and dropped it in the water, and it came up half crushed, with great big scratch marks on it. "What are those marks?" Hans looked closely. "Teeth," he answered. I decided that I never wanted to see the huge animal with teeth so strong as to crush the iron and leave such marks. On Tuesday of 18th of August, we moved as before. I fell asleep only to be awakened when the raft was lifted high out of the water. "What is it?" I yelled. His hands raised and pointed to a huge black mass moving in and out of the water, about 200 yards from the raft. "A colossal monster!" I cried. "Yes," cried my uncle, "and over there is a huge sea lizard, and there, closer to the raft, a giant crocodile with teeth about at least a foot high." Then an enormous whale appeared, 40-foot long turtles with other huge monsters, all heading towards us, ready to destroy our raft with a movement of a tail or a bite of a mouth. I picked up my rifle, ready to shoot, but Ham stopped me. A bullet would have no effect on the armless scales covering their body. But then all but two disappeared into the sea. Those two made a rush at one another. One had a head of a lizard and teeth of a crocodile. The other had a snout of a porpoise. It was the most fearful of all primitive reptiles, the Ichthyosaurus, or a great fish lizard. The other was a monstrous serpent, with a hard shell or turtle. It was it was the terrible Plesiosaurus, or sea crocodile. As we watched, the two giants began a furious battle that lasted for hours. Mountains of water dashed over our raft and nearly hurled us headlong into the waves. Hideous hisses from the monsters brought terror to our hearts. Suddenly the two disappeared beneath the waves, only almost drawing us into the whirlpool as they left behind. Several minutes passed, and then the head of the Plesiosaurus rose out of the water, its serpent-like neck twisted into agony of death. Its body convulsed, then stopped. The mighty snake lay dead on the now calm waters. As for the ichthyosaurus, had he now gone under the sea to rest, or would he reappear to destroy us?